My name is Lee Bennett, and I was 34 years old when my mother gave me an empty box at my wedding. She waited until every plate had been cleared. She waited until the music stopped, until the photographer turned his camera toward the head table, until all 106 guests were facing me. Then she rose in a silver dress, lifted a large cream-colored package tied with burgundy ribbon, and announced that she had one final wedding gift for her only sensible daughter. The box was beautiful, heavy-looking, expensive-looking, the kind of package that made people lean forward before it was even opened. Inside, there was nothing. Not a card, not a photograph, not even a cruel little note. Just pale tissue paper wrapped around air. My mother smiled as I stared into it. Then she said, loudly enough for the back tables to hear, "At least now everyone can see what you traded this family for." A few people laughed because they thought they were supposed to. My aunt covered her mouth. My sister Natalie made the small, breathy sound she always made when she was uncomfortable and wanted our mother to approve of her. Someone near the bar whispered my husband's name. I did not cry. Not then. The moment that changed my family came 18 minutes later, when my grandmother placed a narrow wooden case into my hands and told me to open it while looking directly at my mother. What happened after that ended an inheritance, saved a house, exposed a lie that had shaped 3 generations, and taught me that humiliation only works when the person humiliating you still owns the definition of your worth. But to understand why an empty box could silence an entire wedding hall, you need to understand the family I came from. I was the dependable daughter. That was the title assigned to me before I was old enough to know titles could become cages. Natalie was the charming one. My cousin Paige was the beautiful one. My younger brother, before he moved across the country and stopped coming home, had been the difficult genius. I was dependable. Dependable meant I remembered prescriptions, birthdays, appointment times, dietary restrictions, and which aunt was no longer speaking to which cousin. Dependable meant I kept spare keys for 3 houses and knew the passwords to my grandmother's utility accounts. Dependable meant that when my mother promised to organize something, I organized it, and when Natalie forgot something, I covered for her. I worked as a title examiner for a real estate law office. Most people found the job dull. I loved it. Land records do not care who speaks the loudest at dinner. A deed says what it says. A lien exists or it does not. A missing signature cannot be repaired by charm. I spent my days following ownership through old courthouse books, learning how one overlooked clause could alter the future of a family. My mother, Vivian Bennett, disliked my job because it did not impress people at charity dinners. She preferred to say I helped with legal matters. She also preferred to say our family had deep roots in the county, which was her elegant way of implying that we came from money. We did not. That was the first lie. The second lie was that love in our family had nothing to do with money. My mother measured everything. She measured the quality of restaurants by the cost of bottled water. She measured neighbors by the cars in their driveways. She measured apologies by what they were accompanied by. She measured daughters by usefulness and husbands by income. When she became upset, she did not yell immediately. First, she became quiet. Then she opened the Notes app on her phone and began listing things. Every kindness became evidence. In a case, she was always preparing. I learned young that affection came with receipts. I also learned that I could delay rejection by remaining useful. So I became useful beyond reason. I drove my grandmother Evelyn to every medical appointment after she stopped driving at night. I repaired Natalie's resume, filled out our uncle's insurance forms, and spent a week sorting receipts after my father died. I made casseroles for people who had never once asked how I was doing. I showed up early, left late, and said, "It's fine," so often that the words stopped meaning anything. Somewhere inside me, a bargain formed. If I did enough, one day my mother would look at me without evaluating me. I never said the bargain aloud because I knew how desperate it sounded. I simply kept paying toward a debt that had no original amount and no final balance. Then I met Owen Carter. It happened in a hardware store on a wet Tuesday evening. I was standing in the plumbing aisle holding two nearly identical valves and trying to decide which one matched the leaking pipe under my grandmother's kitchen sink. Owen was wearing work boots dusted with drywall and holding a coil of electrical cable over one shoulder. He watched me compare labels for several minutes, Biff. Or asking, "Are you fixing a sink or rebuilding a submarine?" I told him a sink. He took one valve from my hand, studied it, and asked what year the house had been built. I knew the answer immediately, 1968. He smiled. "Then you want the ugly one." He was right. Owen was a commercial electrician. He spent his days inside half-finished buildings, wiring hospitals, schools, and warehouses before anyone else came in to paint over the walls. He liked early breakfasts, old detective movies, and repairing things that other people had already decided to replace. He was not polished. He did not perform. He listened all the way to the end of a sentence. On our second date, he asked what I would do with a month that belonged only to me. I could not answer at first. No one had asked what I wanted without connecting it to duty. With Owen, help arrived without a receipt, and silence was never used as punishment. When he proposed a year later, he did it on the old dock behind my grandmother's house. He did not kneel because the boards were damp, and he said he wanted to begin our marriage with good judgment. He held out a simple ring and told me he did not need me to be useful every minute. He only wanted me to be honest and present. I said yes before he finished. My mother's first question was not whether I was happy. She asked whether he had health insurance. Her second question was whether electricians had pensions. Her third was whether I understood that marriage could permanently change how people saw me. At our engagement dinner, she arranged the seating so carefully that each insult looked accidental. Owen was placed beside my niece Chloe, who was 10, and two teenage cousins at the far end near the kitchen doors. When I objected to the engagement dinner seating, Vivian claimed Owen would be comfortable with the children. Later, she asked his salary across the table and called stability its own kind of ambition. I was preparing to defend him when my grandmother moved her plate to the far end. She was 82 then, small, silver-haired, and usually quiet in public. My mother had spent years speaking for her. Grandma is tired. Grandma does not like crowds. Grandma prefers that I handle it. That night, Evelyn took her plate and walked to the far end of the table. She sat beside Owen. Then she asked him how many apprentices he had trained. Owen said 4. She asked whether they were good. He said two were excellent, one was improving, and one thought electricity respected confidence. My grandmother laughed so suddenly that the whole table turned. For the rest of dinner, she spoke only to him. In the car afterward, my mother opened her phone. I watched her start a list. She called my marriage a poor investment and warned that love created no protection or leverage. That word stayed with me. My mother did not think relationships were homes. She thought they were systems of pressure. Then she said, "If you go through with this, do not expect your portion to remain untouched." I thought she meant her will. I told her I was not marrying for an inheritance. She gave me a look that said I was too naive to understand the conversation. At the time, I did not know that "your portion" referred to a lakeside house my grandfather had built with his own hands, and that my mother had already begun arranging its sale. My grandfather, Thomas, died 7 years before my wedding. He had broad hands, a crooked index finger, and a habit of whistling the same 4 notes while he worked. I never knew the title of the song. No one did. The lake house was his masterpiece. It stood 30 miles outside town, at the end of a road that narrowed until the trees seemed to close behind you. The exterior cedar had turned gray. The porch leaned slightly toward the water. The upstairs windows stuck in humid weather. It was not impressive by my mother's standards. It was the most beautiful place I knew. Thomas had built it over years, mostly on weekends. He poured the footings, framed the walls, ran the pipes, laid the floors, and carved the initials T and E into the underside of the porch rail, where only my grandmother knew to look. Every safe memory from my childhood lived somewhere in that house. After he died, Evelyn remained there. She liked the quiet. She knew every sound the place made. She could tell the difference between rain on the kitchen roof and rain on the back addition. My mother wanted her to move into an assisted living complex near town. Evelyn refused. So my mother began calling the house unsafe. Then impractical. Then irresponsible. 2 weeks before the wedding, I stopped by my mother's home to deliver revised seating cards. She was in the breakfast room speaking on speakerphone to a real estate agent. I heard the words like frontage, quick sale, and remove personal items before listing photographs. I stood in the hall, holding a stack of cards with people's names PR. Inted in gold, and felt my fingers go cold. When she ended the call, I stepped into the room. "Are you selling Grandma's house?" She did not flinch. "We are exploring options." "It isn't yours." "She is 82. That is not an answer. She cannot manage it indefinitely." "Has she asked you to sell?" My mother's expression changed. It did not become angry. It became administrative. "This is exactly why I did not involve you. You become sentimental and confuse sentiment with judgment." I reminded her that title remained in Evelyn's name. My mother reminded me that families often made decisions before paperwork caught up. I knew enough about property law to hear the threat hidden in that sentence. 3 days later, she withdrew her contribution to the wedding. Months earlier, she had offered to pay for the hotel ballroom and dinner. I had resisted at first, but she insisted in front of relatives. She said it was what a mother did for her daughter. Now she sent an email to 37 people, announcing that she could no longer financially support a union entered without adequate foresight. It was not a financial decision. It was a public punishment. She expected me to panic. The ballroom deposit was due in 4 days. The catering balance was more than I had in savings. She believed the practical daughter would calculate the cost of disobedience and return to the approved path. Instead, Owen and I canceled the ballroom. We held the wedding in the community hall behind St. Andrew's Church, where the ceiling tiles were stained near the kitchen and the folding chairs did not match. We bought string lights from a discount store. Owen's uncle brought a smoker. My friend Marisol baked 3 different cakes because she refused to trust a single cake with that much emotional responsibility. We paid for everything ourselves. I expected to feel ashamed. Instead, I felt relieved. No one could withdraw a gift we had not accepted. No one could claim ownership of a day they had not purchased. The wedding became smaller, warmer in hours. That frightened my mother. Control had always entered through generosity. When generosity stopped working, she moved to spectacle. 5 days before the ceremony, Natalie came to my apartment to help assemble table numbers. She drank 2 glasses of wine too quickly and began smiling at secrets she had promised not to reveal. Natalie finally admitted that Vivian had prepared a public wedding gift. She would not explain it, only repeated our mother's warning that people needed to understand what their choices cost. That night, my mother called to ask whether the hall had proper parking. Near the end of the conversation, she said, "I hope you are prepared to receive what you have earned." Then she wished me good night. I stood in my kitchen holding the silent phone, and every instinct I had developed in years of reading deceptive documents told me the same thing. A performance was coming, but fear had already shaped too many decisions in my life. I did not want my mother to become the author of my wedding simply because I was trying to avoid her. So I made myself a promise. Whatever she did, I would not give her the scene she wanted. I did not know my grandmother had made a promise of her own. On the morning of the wedding, the community hall smelled like lemon cleaner, coffee, and greenery. Owen arrived before sunrise to fix a row of outlets that tripped whenever the coffee urn was plugged in. By 8, he was standing on a ladder testing the string lights one section at a time. Chloe followed him with a roll of electrical tape tucked over her wrist like a bracelet. She had appointed herself assistant electrician. When I arrived, she ran over and whispered that Uncle Owen had made every light work, without even being rude to the building. I told her that was one of his gifts. While my friend fastened the back of my dress, my phone rang. It was Evelyn. Her voice sounded lower than usual. "Your mother told everyone I was too weak to attend," she said. She had arranged her own ride and would be there no matter what Vivian wanted. "I am bringing you something Thomas made. I should have given it to you long ago. When I place it in your hands, wait until I tell you where to open it." I asked why. "Because some truths need witnesses." Then she hung up. The ceremony began at 4. Owen wore a navy suit that did not quite conceal the shape of his work shoulders. His hands shook when I reached him. Mine shook harder. He had written his vows on the back of an electrical supply invoice because he had forgotten the card in his truck. He promised to tell me the truth even when truth was inconvenient. He promised not to confuse being needed with being loved. He promised that if we ever lost our way, we would return to the last place we had been honest. I had prepared a polished speech. When my turn came, I folded it. I told him he was the fur, sent person who had ever helped me without making me smaller. I promised never to use silence as punishment. I promised to build a life where kindness would not be tracked. The hall was quiet. Then the rear doors opened. My grandmother entered in a wheelchair wearing a deep green dress and pearl earrings. Mrs. Alvarez pushed her down the aisle. On Evelyn's lap rested a long wooden case wrapped in a faded linen napkin. My mother turned. For one instant, the expression on her face was not annoyance. It was fear. Then she smiled for the room. The reception began easily enough. Owen's family danced before dinner. My mother's relatives watched from the edges as though joy might stain them. Children ran between tables. Someone spilled lemonade near the guest book. The smoker outside produced enough food for twice the number of guests. For a while, I forgot to be afraid. Then dessert plates were cleared. My mother stood. She tapped a spoon against her glass, and the room settled. She spoke warmly about family. She spoke about choices. She spoke about how every marriage carried a value that time would reveal. Then she lifted the cream-colored box. "I have one last gift for Lee and Owen," she said. "Something that expresses exactly what I believe they have chosen." The box was large enough to hold a set of crystal glasses. She carried it toward me. The photographer raised his camera. Owen's hand closed around mine beneath the table. My grandmother's fingers touched my wrist. I took the package. It weighed almost nothing. The ribbon slid loose. I lifted the lid. Inside lay 3 sheets of tissue paper and nothing else. There was a silence sharp enough to hear. My mother waited until I looked up. Then she said, "That is what remains when a woman throws away her future for a man with tools." Someone laughed. Another person followed. The sound spread unevenly, more nervous than joyful, but it spread. Natalie lowered her eyes and gave a small, reflexive laugh. My Aunt Miriam smiled, as though the moment were clever instead of cruel. I looked into the box. For years, I had feared that beneath all my work, all my usefulness, all my effort, there might be nothing in me that anyone would choose without payment. My mother had found that fear, wrapped it, and placed it in my hands. She expected tears. What I felt first was not grief. It was recognition. The box was her entire system made visible. Beautiful packaging, public presentation, nothing inside but a demand for reaction. Across the room, Chloe was not laughing. She stared at my mother with a child's absolute horror, the kind adults learn to disguise. My grandmother gripped my wrist. "Come closer," she said. I bent toward her. She drew the long wooden case from beneath the tablecloth and pressed it against my stomach. It was heavier than the empty box. "Take this back to your chair," she whispered. "Set it where everyone can see." I looked at her. "What is it?" "The part your mother hoped would stay buried." Her eyes moved toward Vivian. "When you open it, look at her. Do not look down. Do not apologize with your face. I carried the wooden case to the head table. The hall had begun to murmur. My mother returned to her seat wearing the satisfied expression of someone who believed discomfort proved authority. I placed the case in front of me. It was dark walnut, scratched along one side with a brass latch shaped like a leaf. I recognized my grandfather's workmanship immediately. He had made drawers with the same narrow dovetail joints. I opened it. Inside were 4 objects. The first was a slim gold wedding band, worn thin at the bottom. The second was a black-and-white photograph of my grandfather as a young man. He stood beside a service van in stained work clothes, one boot on the bumper, smiling with the unguarded pride of someone at the beginning of a difficult life. The third was a brass badge stamped with the words United Electrical and Pipe TRADES, Local 214, and the number 608. The fourth was an envelope bearing my name in my grandmother's handwriting. My fingers trembled as I opened it. The note was brief. Leah, your grandfather spent his life being treated as less by people who depended on his work. He built the houses they showed off, repaired the systems they never noticed, and paid for the life your mother later pretended had arrived by inheritance. This ring reminds you that love can survive without approval. This badge reminds you that honest work is not shameful. This photograph reminds you that a family can erase a man from its story without erasing what he built. When anyone puts a price on you, remember who taught them to count. Evelyn. At the bottom, beneath her signature, she had added one final sentence. Thomas Bennett was never beneath this family. He was the foundation under it. I read the note twice. Then I raised my eyes. My mother had seen the badge. Her face lost color, so quickly that Aunt Miriam reached toward her arm. Vivian stood halfway, knocked her water glass, and caught the edge of the table with both hands. For a moment, I thought she would cross the room and take the case. Instead, she sat down again. But it was too late. People had noticed. Not everyone understood what they were seeing, but everyone saw fear. The empty box had been meant to reveal my humiliation. The wooden case revealed hers. I had grown up hearing that our family had always been established. My mother spoke of the Bennett name as though it had descended from portraits in a gallery. Yet I remembered a photograph that disappeared from our hallway when I was 9. A man beside a service van, my grandfather. Now I held the original in my hand. She had humiliated Owen for being a tradesman at a wedding funded by savings that ultimately existed because another tradesman had worked himself into prosperity. She had called my future empty while sitting inside a family story, emptied of the man who made it possible. My mother rose again. This time she moved quickly toward me. Her smile was fixed, but her eyes were furious. "Walk with me," she said softly. I followed her into the coachroom corridor because Chloe was close enough to hear, and because I wanted to know what truth sounded like in my mother's mouth when there was no audience. The moment the door closed, her expression changed. "Put it away," she said. I refused. She called Evelyn confused and the photograph irrelevant. I asked the question she had spent years avoiding. "Then why did you erase him?" For a second, pain crossed her face. real pain. Then it hardened into anger. You have no idea what it was like to grow up in this town as the repairman's daughter. No, I don't. You made sure I didn't. She stepped closer. The lake house must be sold. Your grandmother cannot remain there. I have handled the taxes, insurance, repairs, and practical realities while you visit on weekends and imagine yourself devoted. I pay the utility bills. I scheduled the roof inspection. I know the property record. Her eyes sharpened. That was when I understood. The wedding was not merely punishment for marrying Owen. It was leverage connected to the house. My mother needed me uncertain. She needed me outside the family's inner circle. She needed my grandmother described as confused, and she needed anyone with legal knowledge to feel ashamed of challenging her. I asked, "What have you asked Grandma to sign?" She did not answer. The silence answered for her. I returned to the reception, danced with Owen, cut the cake, and watched the facts align in my mind. The withdrawn money, the threat about my portion, the false claims about Evelyn's health, the real estate agent, and my mother's terror at seeing Thomas's badge. These were not separate events. They were parts of one plan. That night, after the hall emptied, Owen found me sitting at the head table with the wooden case open. "What do you need?" he asked. "I need to see Grandma tomorrow." "We'll go." "I think my mother is trying to transfer the lake house." He looked toward the cream-colored box on the floor. "Then she picked the wrong woman to remind about paperwork." The next morning, we drove to Evelyn's house with coffee, breakfast sandwiches, and the wooden case. My grandmother was waiting at the kitchen table, wearing reading glasses, and solving a crossword puzzle in ink. She was not confused. She was not disoriented. She knew the date, the weather forecast, the exact number of days since my grandfather died, and which window needed new weather stripping before winter. My mother's story began collapsing before I had taken off my coat. Evelyn asked Owen to sit in Thomas's chair. He hesitated. "He would have liked you," she said. "Sit down." Then she placed both hands around her coffee mug. "I should have told you years ago," she said to me. "I thought keeping peace was the same as protecting the family. It is not." She told us the truth. Thomas Bennett had started working at 17. His father died young, and Thomas left school to support his mother and two sisters. He apprenticed under a pipe fitter, then learned electrical work because small contractors in rural counties often did whatever the job required. But as a girl, Vivian had been mocked. The town's wealthy children called her the plumber's daughter. Their parents invited Thomas through back doors to repair boilers and later ignored him at fundraisers. At 13, my mother attended a dance in a dress Evelyn had sewn. Other girls laughed at the uneven hem. Vivian came home before the music ended and cut the dress into pieces. Thomas took extra work for weeks and bought her a department store dress. She wore it once. Then she began constructing a different identity. She corrected people who described her father as a plumber. She said he owned infrastructure companies. She stopped in, inviting school friends to the lake house because his tools were visible. When Thomas's business succeeded, she accepted the money but rejected the history. She was ashamed before she was cruel, Evelyn said. I want you to understand that. For a moment, I felt sorry for the girl my mother had been. Pity is not permission, she said. A wound can explain what a person becomes. It does not entitle them to wound everyone after them. Then she brought out a blue folder. Inside was a deed prepared by a law office I recognized. It transferred the lake property from Evelyn Bennett to Vivian Bennett for nominal consideration. The signature line was blank. A mobile notary was scheduled to arrive Monday morning. My mother had told Evelyn the transfer was temporary. She said it would simplify insurance. She said the property could remain within the family while she managed repairs. But the real estate agent had already discussed a listing date. My grandmother had overheard enough to understand the plan. I asked Evelyn whether she wanted to sell, move, or transfer the property to Vivian. She answered no to all three without hesitation. Then her voice softened. I do not want you to own it either. Not because you would misuse it, because your mother would spend the rest of my life saying you manipulated me. Then she would spend the rest of yours trying to take it. I want the house removed from the contest. What do you want it to become? She looked through the kitchen window toward the lake. A place that cannot be converted into a victory. She wanted a trust. She wanted the right to remain in the house for life. After her death, she wanted the property maintained as a family retreat, never sold, never mortgaged, and never used as collateral. She wanted future descendants to be able to stay there during divorce, grief, unemployment, illness, or any season when home became uncertain. She wanted the house named for Thomas. Most of all, she wanted the documents created in a way no one could honestly challenge. I explained what would be necessary: independent counsel, a capacity evaluation, no private benefit to me, clear trusteeship, filing before Monday. That afternoon, my mother called. She said the wedding had become emotional. She said perhaps the box had been too theatrical. She said she did not want one disagreement to destroy our relationship. Then she offered terms. If I stayed out of the property matter, if I stopped encouraging Evelyn's suspicion, and if I agreed not to discuss Thomas's work history with extended family, she would restore me to her will. Finally, she said, "You are my daughter, Lee. You belong with us." There it was, the sentence I had worked for since childhood. She called me sweetheart and gave me time to think. After the call, I sat on my kitchen floor with my back against a cabinet. Owen found me there. She offered me everything, I said. He sat beside me. What did she ask you to sell? I told Owen the price was my silence, my grandmother's trust, and the part of me that still believed love could be purchased. He did not choose for me. He only reminded me that no choice was free. Owen rested his shoulder against mine. That night, I did not sleep. I placed the empty cream box on the dining table. Beside it, I placed Thomas's wooden case. The contrast was almost absurd. One had been expensive, glossy and hollow. The other was scratched, handmade, and full of history. I thought about my mother's offer, the will, the honeymoon, the house deposit, public approval. Then I thought about the years I had spent proving I deserved affection. I understood something shortly before dawn. The empty box hurt because part of me already believed its message. I believed that without usefulness I was nothing. I believed that if my mother rejected me, the rejection revealed a truth. I believed approval was evidence of value. Her offer did not change the system. It invited me back into it. I could win the inheritance and lose the right to define myself. By sunrise, I knew my answer. Friday morning, I took Evelyn to see an attorney named Monica Reyes, a woman known for asking slow questions and keeping meticulous notes. Evelyn met with her alone first. A geriatric physician performed a capacity evaluation and documented that Evelyn understood the nature of her assets, the identity of her family members, the purpose of the trust, and the consequences of transferring the property. The trust was drafted, reviewed, revised, witnessed, and signed. Evelyn retained the unrestricted right to live in the house for the rest of her life. After her death, the property would be managed by an independent trustee. It could not be sold, mortgaged, or transferred for private gain. Family members could use it under written rules Evelyn helped design. When my grandmother signed, she pressed the pen so firmly that the final letter cut slightly into the paper. The documents were recorded that afternoon. Monday's deed became useless before Monday arrived. On the drive back to the lake, Evelyn opened her window. Wind lifted her silver hair. Your grandfather always said paperwork was how people with clean hands stole from people with dirty ones, she said. That is a very dark saying. He worked for contractors. I laughed. Then she touched my sleeve. You use the part of yourself your mother called boring. My caution. Your care, there is a difference. The family brunch was held Sunday at my mother's house. Vivian had invited nearly everyone who had witnessed the wedding humiliation. She framed it as a reconciliation. Natalie texted me that morning to say Mom was really trying and that I should not make things worse. When Owen and I arrived, the dining room looked staged for a magazine. White flowers, linen napkins, crystal water glasses, place cards. My mother greeted Owen warmly for the first time. She touched his arm and asked about his projects. She told my aunt that electricians were essential to modern life. The performance was almost impressive. On the table beside my plate, I placed Thomas's wooden case. My mother saw it. Her smile faltered. Then she raised her glass. She welcomed everyone. She spoke about forgiveness, misunderstanding, and the importance of family unity. She said Lee and I have resolved our differences. I had not said that. She announced that I would remain in the family estate plan. She announced that she intended to help Owen and me purchase a proper home. She announced that after a difficult week, we had all returned to reason. My mother reached for my hand. I stood. She smiled, expecting gratitude. Thank you, I said. Her smile widened. Then I opened the wooden case. I need to explain what I am thanking you for. The room changed. I removed the photograph and held it upright. This is my grandfather, Thomas Bennett. Most of us were taught not to speak about the work he did. We were told our family had always been established. That was not true. My mother placed her glass down. Leah. I continued. Thomas began as a pipe fitter and electrician. He repaired homes, factories, schools, and boilers. He built Bennett Mechanical. He paid for the college educations, houses, investments, and opportunities that later became the family reputation we were told to protect. My aunt stared at the photograph. One cousin leaned forward. I removed the brass badge and pinned it to my dress. At my wedding, my husband was mocked for working with his hands. My marriage was called worthless because Owen is a tradesman. That insult did not only dishonor him, it repeated the shame this family directed at the man who created nearly everything we now treat as evidence of superiority. My mother stood. This is inappropriate. So was the empty box. No one laughed. I did not raise my voice. I am not telling this story to humiliate anyone. I am telling it because silence has been used as property in this family. Whoever controlled the story controlled who belonged. Then I told them about the lake house. I explained that Evelyn had acted independently, with her own attorney and physician. I explained that she had placed the property into an irrevocable trust. I explained that it would remain available to the family, but could never be sold for individual profit. The trust was recorded Friday, I said. The house is now legally protected. My mother's chair scraped the floor. Vivian accused me of interfering and exploiting a vulnerable woman. I answered that the house was Evelyn's, that she had been evaluated, and that independent counsel had represented her. Each accusation met a fact already preserved in writing. That was the power of doing things correctly. My mother looked around the table and realized no one was rescuing her. Then she turned to me and delivered the punishment she believed would end the argument. Permanent removal from her will, no housing help, no inheritance, nothing. The empty box seemed to appear between us again. I looked at the chair beside her, the favored seat. I looked at the perfect table and the expensive flowers. I looked at the woman who had spent decades running from a girl in a handmade dress and had become the kind of person that girl once feared. I loved her. I hated what she had done. Both were true. Then I said, "You can keep every dollar." Her face became still. My value was never part of your estate. The clock in the hallway ticked. No one moved. I continued, because there were words I needed to hear myself say. I am not leaving this family. I am leaving the system where belonging is rented and affection is collateral. You may choose not to speak to me. You may remove my name from every document you control. But you do not get to declare me empty because I stopped paying for a place at your table. My mother's eyes filled with tears. She blinked, said them back angrily. For one moment, I saw the 13-year-old girl in the homemade dress. I wanted to cross the room. I wanted to comfort her. I also knew that comforting her had always required abandoning myself. So I remained where I was. I am sorry you were made ashamed of your father, I said. I am sorry no one protected you from people who taught you that work made him small, but I will not continue what they started. Her face tightened. Get out. I nodded. Owen stood. I closed the wooden case. At the doorway, Chloe ran after us and asked about the badge. I knelt and told her Thomas had begun with little money but possessed skill, courage, loyalty, and generosity. She asked whether the lake house would still be there for her. I said yes. Behind her, Natalie looked from our mother to her daughter and whispered, "Call me later." That was the first crack. I left my mother's house with no inheritance, no approval, and no favored chair. The loss was real. Freedom did not erase grief. It revealed how much grief had been waiting. For several weeks, I woke with the impulse to fix everything. I drafted messages to my mother and deleted them. I imagined apologizing for the brunch even though every word I had said was true. I worried about holidays. I worried about what relatives were saying. I worried that I had become cruel simply because I had stopped cooperating. 6 months passed. Vivian removed me from her will and told relatives I had manipulated Evelyn, though the independent legal record made that story difficult to sustain. Some believed her anyway. Others stepped back. Natalie began calling in cautious, practical conversations until one night she admitted she had laughed at the wedding because she was afraid not to. She started therapy and began correcting people who erased Thomas's trade work from the family history. Chloe visited the lake house 3 times that summer. Owen taught her to replace a light switch under supervision. Evelyn taught her to clean fish, though Chloe declared the process morally suspicious. I showed her the carved initials beneath the porch rail. We hung Thomas's photograph in the front hallway. I kept the ring. On difficult days, I turn it around my finger and remember that my grandmother wore it through 61 years of arguments, bills, illness, ordinary dinners, and a life other people had predicted would disappoint her. The lake house remains standing. It is not valuable because it could sell for a large amount. It is valuable because it cannot be converted into anyone's victory. There is no perfect ending to a story like mine. The person who humiliates you in public is often counting on a private belief you already carry. They do not create the wound in that moment. They press on the place where you have been trained to doubt yourself. My mother said I had traded away my future for a man with tools. She was wrong. I chose a man who knows that power should make a room safer, not darker. I chose a grandmother who finally trusted her own voice. I chose a grandfather's true name over a family's polished lie. Most of all, I chose to stop treating love as a bill. Last Thanksgiving, Natalie came with Chloe. It was the first holiday we had spent together without Vivian. There were only 6 of us. The turkey was dry. Owen dropped a tray of roasted vegetables. Evelyn accused the pie of having too much cinnamon and then ate 2 slices. No one used the good china. No one assigned seats. At one point, Chloe asked whether great-grandpa Thomas would have liked the dinner. Evelyn looked around the table. He would have fixed the loose cabinet hinge before dessert, she said. Owen stood automatically. We all shouted, "Sit down." He sat. We laughed. Not the sharp laughter from my wedding. Not the laughter that asks who will be sacrificed so everyone else can feel safe. This laughter held no target. It simply filled the room. After dinner, I stepped onto the porch. The lake was dark and flat. Through the window, I could see Owen drying dishes while Natalie talked. Chloe sat beside Evelyn looking through old photographs. That empty box once felt like the final verdict on my life. Now it sits on a shelf, filled with proof that my family's real history was never empty at all. The emptiness belonged to the story we had been told. And stories can be rewritten when someone finally stops protecting the lie. So if anyone has ever tried to calculate your worth from your salary, your usefulness, your obedience, your last name, your marriage, or the amount you were willing to endure, remember this. Their calculation is not a law. Their approval is not a title deed. Their rejection is not an inventory of your soul. You do not have to keep auditioning for people who only applaud when you disappear. You do not have to accept a beautiful box simply because everyone is watching. And you do not have to surrender the pen to the person WH. O taught you to doubt your own value. Sometimes dignity begins quietly. It begins when you ask one clear question: what do I actually want? It grows when you listen to the answer. It becomes real when you protect that answer, even when the people who benefited from your silence call you selfish. If this story reminded you of someone who has been made to feel small by the people who should have protected them, share it with them. Tell me in the comments which moment stayed with you. Subscribe to After Silence Stories for more stories about betrayal, truth, dignity, and the courage to walk away. And I'll meet you in the next episode.